Never before have I put such an emphasis on those little eye-catching words in the thumbnail of a video. Never before have they had such a profound connection with my thoughts of a title as a whole, and how I interpret what the developers were trying to achieve. Death's Door's visual presentation, combat, platforming, puzzles, game structure, score, writing, atmosphere, and world building are also polished and superbly designed. Each individual aspect is simple yet fantastic. Be that the combat, which focuses more on player positioning rather than your build, or the importance of stringing together combos. Be it in the puzzles that are never overwhelming or frustrating while still making you think on your feet, typically in a brief window of time while lasers are trying to tear the feathers off your back, or the platforms under your feet are crumbling away. Or it's the platforming that is more about balancing on icy terrain as you uncontrollably slide into pillars of icicles, or hookshotting yourself across bottomless pits. It's the character designs that are so kooky and eccentric, perfectly characterizing each mortal being you come across in your adventure. The word wonderful I used was on purpose, by the way. It's not a cheap synonym for amazing or brilliant, although Death's Door is both of those things. No, Death's Door actually evokes the feeling of wonder. It makes me want to see what's over the next crest, what's outside the reach of the overgrown ruins, and what I'll find if I keep scaling the summit, or delve deeper into the basement of the Wicked Witch. But it's not just the distinctive locations that made my mind wander, it's also the writing and the characters. I wanted to know what these lovable characters' lives were like before this tale began, what the Gravedigger was up to, what was Pothead like before he got cursed, and what was the bureaucratic Reaping Commission like in its prime, if it ever had a prime. Not least of all is the incredible score that perfectly paces your adventure, constantly playing along in the background as you explore, before ramping up into a bombastic, hair-raising symphony. A lot of this wouldn't mean much to you if you haven't played Death's Door, but it's the perfect reason why you should play it. Although the cute art style, basic looking combat, and text box driven conversations all look simple, they truly have this sleek, ethereal quality to them that I never got bored of in the 10-hour campaign. I guess all I have left to say in this introduction block is Death's Door is simply wonderful. Death's Door is an isometric action-adventure game developed by the two-man studio Acid Nerve. First of all, can I mention that is absolutely nuts? To think this was created by two guys and a handful of talented artists is just insane. I haven't played as so many people made this game of this quality since Hollow Knight. I reviewed Kena Bridge of Spirits a month or so back, and I mentioned it was basically an adaptation of the 3D Zelda format, with your hub area, branching paths leading to different biomes where you'll accumulate new items to use against enemies, and equipment to solve puzzles before culminating in a dungeon and a boss fight. Well, Death's Door is basically that, but for the 2D Zelda games. I would hearken this most to Link's Awakening, especially the remake on Switch, which is my closest comparison to any 2D Zelda. Your journey starts here. As a cute little crow with a glowing sword on your back, ready for another day of work, you step off the bus. This is the Reaping Commission headquarters, also known as the Hall of Doors. This is where you'll upgrade your stats, find secrets, and interact with doorways to instantly access different regions of the map, different dungeons, and other areas like that. But for now, all you'll find are some loiterers, two work colleagues slowly typing away at their desks, and the Vault Keeper silently snoozing in the background. Your first task of the day is to go to the Groove of the Spirits, where you are to kill a boss and retrieve its soul. Here is where you'll learn some basics like rolling, how to aim and fire your bow, and one of the fundamental puzzle designs. By hitting glowing pillars, a nearby blocked pathway will open, leading to a new area. At the end of the linear path is your target. The Forest Spirit is the first enemy you'll battle against, and it's a surprisingly deep fight. It has multiple types of attacks, a couple stages where the boss will power up and become more powerful, and overall it just looks and sounds great. Just as you're about to claim its soul, a mischievous crow materializes through a door and knocks you unconscious. Awakening will reveal a door a few paces behind you, and entering it will transport you to the Lost Cemetery, the in-game hub area of sorts. Liken the Hall of Doors to the Hunter's Dream in Bloodborne, and the Lost Cemetery to Central Yharnam. Moving through the Lost Cemetery will be a fairly linear affair. Each path will lead you to one of two areas. Either a blocked passageway that you can't unlock until you gain one of the many Metroidvania-style abilities, or you'll be led to the correct path, which in turn will lead you to the next blocked doorway or another way forward. Eventually you'll come across the mischievous crow again, and he'll recite why he knocked you out and what your quest is. It's quite simple really. You are to kill the three most powerful corrupt beings in the nearby regions. To the north in a manor lives the conniving Wicked Witch. Beyond the forest is the self-proclaimed king, ruling with an iron fist over the ruins of a flooded cathedral. And atop the mountain to the west lives a vicious primal beast. Embarking on this adventure will first take you to the estate of the Witch Urn, in hopes to take down the Wicked Witch. Out front, you'll run into one of the many colourful personalities. Moments earlier, you would have met the foreboding gravedigger Steadhone. This time, however, it's the ever-charming and cheeky Pothead. Despite being cursed and seemingly stuck this way forever, he offers you a warm welcome with a tilt of his ceramic pot, much like one would with a top hat. Pothead is but one of the many characters you'll converse with in your journey, each of which will provide necessary world building and insight to the region's problem. Interacting with characters in Death's Door holds little of your playtime, maybe 30 to 45 minutes max, but these precious minutes just ooze with so much personality and style. The writers knew exactly what they were doing every step of the way with the funny, charismatic dialogue. I for one do not usually enjoy text-only stories and character interactions, but Death's Door couldn't have proved me more wrong. Everything to do with characters and writing is just brilliant, really top-notch work done here. As amazing as the writing is, the visuals and sound design are even better. First of all is the art design and the look of this world. I mean, you're seeing it for yourself. Everything is modelled so precisely. The visual direction is so succinct with no location feeling out of place or feeling better than any other particular area. Each location has their own selling point and a visual nod making them unique. The Hall of Doors has its colour palette, or lack thereof, giving off an almost film noir vibe. This lack of colour contrasts beautifully with the red glow emanating from your sword. The Forgotten Forest has its lush, vibrant scenery. While it's never inviting thanks to the plethora of hostile enemies, its flora and fauna sell a thriving environment. The Witch's Mansion stands out for its use of ornate objects, cluttered decor, and being the first location to reveal that this world was built in mind for larger characters. Moving through the halls makes you feel tiny, as you're smaller than the vases that occupy the space. Crossing rooms will have you moving across beds, dressers, and tables, further selling the size difference. Each of the 3 main biomes are broken up with 3, maybe 4 sections, and each section of the biome is different to the next. That sounds a bit convoluted, so let me break that down a bit for you. Making your way to the first of the 3 powerful souls will have you explore the estate of the witch. Here you'll be exploring the gardens, solving puzzles, killing enemies, maybe a mini boss or 2, and inevitably stumbling across locked areas. Once you've progressed far enough and done all the requirements here, you'll gain access to the manor, which in turn will have you doing the same small tasks you were doing in the garden. But now there's an additional task, to find the souls of 4 deceased crows to open a doorway. Each penultimate section of each biome uses this 4 checkpoint structure, and they're the dungeons of Death's Door. They have the most elaborate puzzles, the trickiest platforming areas, and the toughest fights. Once you've made your way through the dungeon, you'll have to survive a quick horde-style invasion before entering the final area, which leads to the boss. This is the campaign structure of Death's Door, and it's fantastic. Each area has enough interesting set pieces and puzzles. The intervening fights all try to use different environmental setups to keep each fight feeling fresh, which is something I'll go into more detail in the combat section of this review. And the boss fights are challenging, all utilising unique attack patterns, they're all visually distinctive, and they all put the cherry on top of their respective areas. Underpinning all of this, and what connects everything you're doing, is the utterly superb score. Not since The Pathless and Miles Morales before that have I had a soundtrack of a game on repeat in the background while I'm working or writing a script or editing. Each track has its own exceptional ethereal feeling to it that perfectly elevates whatever you're doing and wonderfully paces the adventure. I was never bored in this game, even when I was just running from one location to the next or backtracking trying to find secrets. The score is also doing some heavy lifting during the combat encounters, more so in the horde style fights. Whenever these moments start, the music will kick it up a notch, or like 12 notches, and it'll hold this intensity for the entirety of the fight. And it's not like these fights are even that hectic, but it's the music that makes it feel more hectic. There's the sound illusion called the shepherd tone, and I'm going to butcher this, but it essentially refers to a piece of music that uses an illusion and trickery in its octaves to make it sound like its pitch is constantly rising or falling. If done correctly, it can have this never-ending cycle of rising pitch that helps to build tension. Death's Door doesn't use that exact technique, but the way the music is used in combat feels like that. It feels like the encounters are constantly getting more intense. If you don't believe me, just listen to some of these melodies. While everything I've talked about has been universally praised by anyone who has played Death's Door, there has been one avenue that has been a little more controversial: the combat. Combat in Death's Door is simple. It doesn't reach any new heights other 2D action games have explored, but it isn't trying to. The developers clearly had a vision in their minds of what this combat system would be like, and I think they nailed it. The first thing you'll notice when you pick up the controller is the robustness of these controls. Your cute crow guy is really agile. His dodges happen the second you hit the dodge button. He can turn and maneuver between enemies quite easily, and when you get to the trickier platforming towards the mid-game, you still have all the control. I never once got frustrated or annoyed that my crow guy didn't do what I wanted him to do. Next would have to be how good it feels to hit stuff. Your attacks happen instantly with very little swing time, and since your sword is always sheathed on your back, when an attack happens there's a very short wind-up animation that happens over a couple of frames, and then a bright red flash appears, helping to convey the follow-through of the swinging animation. This is a brilliant way to show the player what they're doing, because not only does it look fantastic with its contrast between the world and the brightness of the attack, but it also feels quick to perform, lending itself nicely to the agility of the crow. Acid Nerve took this a step further with how enemies take damage. Whenever an attack lands, the enemy will flash blindingly white and then silhouette to pure black. This contrast means you'll never be guessing if an attack lands. And the same also goes for how you take damage. When hit, the screen will flash with a vignette and all the audio will fade out for just a fraction of a second. So why have I spent the opening of this paragraph talking about attack animations, tight controls, and visual design? Well, that's because that's the entire combat system for the entire game. You swing your weapons a few times, hoping the hits land, then you dodge out of the way so you don't take damage from an enemy, and then you go back in for a few more swings. There are 3 abilities you'll unlock, each of which has a different use for the puzzles and Metroidvania elements, but in combat they all do damage in the same way, so you aren't encouraged to play around with each. There are 5 melee weapons to unlock, each having different damage numbers, swing timers, attack range, and the amount of times you can attack in a combo. One of the 5 is pretty much a joke weapon, so that cuts the total down to 4. All the weapons are optional to use, never forcing you to choose one over the other, nor does the game really encourage you to experiment, since the starting weapon is more than capable of getting you through the entire campaign. I personally use the rogue daggers most of the time, but the Reaper's sword is probably the most consistent weapon. Using the heavy attack while dodging will also perform a quick attack as soon as your roll animation has ended. I didn't really use the heavy attack all that often since your attacks don't stun lock enemies, meaning a longer wind-up animation leaves you open longer to getting hit. And last of all is the leveling up system where you spend souls to increase things like your strength, which ups your damage and attack range, or your dexterity, which decreases the amount of time it takes to charge up melee and ranged attacks, as well as lowering the cooldown between attacks. And that's everything the player has available to them. As you can see, I could explain the entire combat system in 300 words, and it's what you'll be using for the 10 hours or so it takes you to beat the campaign. But where Death's Door adds its complexity in combat is with the enemy variety and the combat arenas. First of all, there is a ton of enemy variety. I would say there has to be easily 20 unique enemies, maybe 30 or more if you include the bosses. They range from fodder enemies like bats or standard grunts that'll die in a hit or two, to purple mages who shoot orbs at you and teleport away when you get too close, to suicidal bombers that'll run you down. You'll come across ranged opponents, tanks with shields, vases that'll rapidly spin, and Rammus looking dudes that get knocked out if they hit a wall. There is so much unique and interesting enemy variety here, and the best part is Death's Door throws all of this at you at the same time. Fight after fight, you'll find yourself in this delicate dance of positioning and ricocheting ranged attacks, and learning what enemies are best to burst down in the beginning of a fight. There's a lot of experimentation that can be done in these fights, versus how the arenas are set up. If I saw bombs were scattered around the environment, I would pick enemies off from a distance by shooting them. Or I could run around in a circle and wait for a group of enemies to be grouped up before I explode that barrel. But if I was in an open space versing the bombers, I could try and shoot them while a bunch of foes were around them. Same goes with the mages. Instead of bursting them down, I could focus on trying to ricochet their projectiles into the surrounding enemies. Yes, this combat system is simple, but that's never a bad thing. I think the best combat systems try to master 2 or 3 things, and if those 2 or 3 things are done well enough, they'll encourage experimentation and let the player feel like they've mastered the combat system. Death's Door is like a symphony where each little piece here and there adds to the spectacle. Each piece harmonizes and reinforces the surrounding instruments. The visuals and design complement the combat, making it not only look fantastic but feel amazing. The atmosphere and writing lends itself to a feeling of foreboding and melancholy, but also unforeseen optimism. The level design, puzzles, and Metroidvania abilities all fold into themselves so seamlessly that it feels like a single vision birthed all of this. I could keep going on about each amazing little element that comes together to make this title feel so much larger, so much more hefty than it actually is. But there's one piece that is constantly strumming away in the background. Sometimes it's quiet and letting you reflect on this world. Sometimes it's loud and bombastic. And sometimes it's just filling in the blanks as you run across the landscape. The music sits comfortably in the middle of this entire production, lifting everything up to make it just a bit better than it already was. Death's Door is $20 USD and can be found on all platforms. It was made by a handful of incredibly talented devs and artists, and it's a must play.